Hello everybody, welcome back to IT Coach for Business Leaders, a podcast from InfoSystems. I'm Josh Davis, the Marketing Director at InfoSystems, and with me is Aaron Swann, the IT Coach for Business Leaders. He's a VCIO at InfoSystems and a wealth of knowledge and a really fun podcast partner to record on.
You're just pouring it on today, aren't you?
Yeah, man, flattery. That's, you never know when I might need a favor or something. So if I'm really nice, then maybe you'll help me at some point. When I run into, when my Surface crashes or something when it's 10 years old, then I'll need some help, right? Anyway, if you haven't noticed, if you didn't notice from the last episode, for those of you who are watching the video of this, we're back in the conference room. Yeah. It's been, 4 or 5 months now?
Been a long 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. So we've been remodeling the InfoSystems office. The conference room is mostly complete. There's only a couple of things that have to be done in here. They're going to mount a new TV monitor on the wall and put up a whiteboard and some other cool things. And so anyway, the space is amazing. So for those of you who haven't been to the InfoSystems office in a while, reach out and come on by. We'd love to show you all of the improvements we've made here and the new team working space upstairs where all of our techs are kind of have a nice collaborative area. It's a great change, especially from kind of the traditional cubicle style setup we had before. But for today's episode, we're going to be talking about physical environment. So, just like InfoSystems updating our physical office space to better reflect the needs of our workforce, you need to make sure that your physical environment reflects the needs of your IT department.
Absolutely.
And so Aaron gave me a really nice list of bullet points of things that need to be addressed, and so we'll just kind of rattle through these bullet points and you can kind of explain maybe some of the considerations that need to be made for each one.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is, we talk a lot about technology and the blinky lights and the components that make it up, but we haven't talked a lot about just the space that it goes in. And unfortunately, it's one of those areas that can cause a lot of problems if it's not done right. And it's also one that's often overlooked.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is, but IT has become a big part of business and has been for quite some time, yet it's still often overlooked when it comes time for those remodels or those new builds or something like that. I'll sit down with the company and it's like, okay, where are we putting the IT equipment? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we'll talk about some of those things.
I guess
today.
when a company's moving into an office space, everybody is more focused on, the communal space, the break room, the amenities, their personal space, what their office setup is going to be like, and yeah, I guess IT gets left out of the discussion in a lot of cases. So first off, we're going to talk about power source. So you had quite a few topics under power, like battery backups and generators and different generators and backups for different purposes. So let's run through some of that stuff. What do companies need to take into consideration when it comes to power for their IT?
So let's just start at the very basic, and that's just your incoming power. Especially if you're doing a remodel or a new build or something like it, and have the ability to control that. If you're going to be setting up, and let's talk about what we're talking about too. You may not have a data center as extensive as we do. It's sitting behind us here. You may just have a little closet. You may be saying, well, I don't really need to worry about this because all my IT infrastructure is in the cloud. Well, it's probably not all in the cloud. You probably may have some, but even if the majority, you're always going to have equipment here that facilitates that connection. You're going to have switches and routers and firewalls and things like that, and those need a proper home as well. So it may be as small as just a little closet,
which is okay.
Which is okay. It's absolutely okay. My personal preference would be, not to hit my microphone, sorry. My personal preference would be that you have, a dedicated space, and it's not just in the corner of someone's office.
Yeah.
Because that goes to physical security. To be able to lock it behind the door is a good thing. But say it is just as small as a closet. Ideally, I'd like for that circuit to be its own dedicated circuit. Why? Well, there are things that can throw noise onto that line. I'll give you an example just from my own home. I've got a decent little stereo system in my media room, and I have noticed of late that even though I do have dedicated power circuits going to that, I still can get some interference. Particularly when my HVAC system kicks on, I hold my subwoofer will, they'll do a little thump.
Yeah.
Now it's a minor thing and doesn't cause too many problems, but I've often seen places, particularly manufacturing facilities, and they're running these large motors and things that draw lots of current, and those are on the same circuit as your IT equipment. It can cause some problems. So, I'd start with let's have a separate circuit to help protect your equipment.
So beyond that, I think the next thing we had talked about was the battery backup.
Yeah. So we all know power outages happen, right?
Yeah.
They're going to, no matter where you are. And so, as a minimum, you ought to have battery backup for really any piece of equipment that's going to service multiple people, whether it be a server, whether it be your firewall, your switches that it hooks into, your routers, anything, wireless access points, ought to be backed up by a battery backup. If for no other reason, just to account for those little power blips that go out, so every time the power just blips, you don't have to wait for everything to reset and boot back up again, and to prolong the longevity of that equipment. It's not good for equipment to be dropping power. Not only does it protect from power dropouts, it also helps protect from brownouts, helps protect from just varying voltage on the line, and just provides a more stable atmosphere for your equipment to run in.
Yeah, and so, I guess that gets into some of the discussion too that we've had in the past about prioritizing and assigning, what are my essential pieces of equipment, and what are things that if the power went out, it's okay that we don't have it on. Now you're saying there are other considerations like protecting the longevity of the equipment by having a backup and preventing it from flicking on and off, when power surges or power dropouts happen. But, there are probably other types of equipment where that doesn't impact them. And if a company says, if this piece of IT is out for a couple hours, if there's a bad storm, it's not going to harm our business.
Right.
And so in those cases, they may not need to address it in that way.
An example of those may just be the workstation itself, right?
Yeah.
A lot of our workforce, you see us both with our laptops here, so we have battery backup built into our system, so if the power blips, well, I tend to stay up, but desktops typically don't have that.
Right.
So I would say desktops is one of those, well, maybe you need it. It depends. One, yes, it'll help protect the longevity of the machine, but do you need it to protect it from a power outage? Well, it depends on your business. If everything else is protected and the power goes out, if your workstation loses power, you probably still can't work.
Right.
So maybe you do want it. Maybe though, if the power goes out and the lights are all out, you're not going to be working anyway.
Right.
You're going to be outside wandering around. So I think that's a business decision to make.
Yeah.
But my opinion is if it services multiple people within the office, it ought to be battery backed up.
But I guess the important takeaway with battery backups here is you don't just put a backup on the server and that's it.
Right.
You need battery backups on multiple pieces of equipment, the network, your workstations, the servers, because if you need to run things when the power's out, then it all has to be backed up with an external source of power.
Right.
A couple of other things related to power, but that have some other factors to them is like cooling. You mentioned that the temperature or I guess the physical temperature of the environment can have a major impact on the equipment. So talk a little bit about cooling that's needed for IT infrastructure.
Well, and if I can, can I back up for
Yeah,
just
sure,
a second?
absolutely.
Let's finish, because I thought one other thing we need to talk about, and that
Mhm.
is the batteries alone are not going to give you full protection depending on your environment. Uh, Typically speaking, we can design a UPS system that can hold systems up for 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour. If you're talking about extended power outages and you still need to be able to operate, and I use the word operate, makes me think of the hospitals
Yeah.
or a doctor's office or something like that, where the power's out. We can't just always just say, oh well, free break for us all.
Yeah.
There could be patient lives at stake or something like that. In
Yeah.
those kind of situations, it goes beyond that, and I would start talking about, well, you probably need a generator
Right.
or something like that sitting outside your office as well. Again, that's not for every business. I don't think every business needs a generator to keep them going. We don't have one here because it's not the nature of our business where we can't take, a power outage of more than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But a lot of times you get the questions, why don't you just make the batteries bigger to keep it longer? Well, that's just not practically possible unless you've just got rooms that you can dedicate to putting UPS systems in. So it's also very costly. So a generator can be your friend in an extended power outage.
I would assume with the advancements in battery technology, with companies like Tesla and stuff like that really driving forward, and they're talking about in the future people will probably have batteries in their home that's part of the electrical system of the house.
Right.
And so maybe at some point battery technology will get to where you can run parts of an entire day off of battery backups, or
Sure.
We don't know what it's going to be like. But for now, you need to build in business continuity for your power system, you're going to need a generator to keep things running for longer periods of time.
Absolutely.
So, now we can move on to the cooling discussion. What do companies need to take into account for the heating and cooling needs for IT equipment?
Well, the simple truth is heat is the enemy of electronics, right? Electronics don't like to be hot. And while at the same time electronics produce a lot of heat.
Yeah.
So it's important to engineer that into your plan. If you're just a small closet and all that's in there is a switch and a firewall, well, maybe you can get by on just the HVAC that's just run throughout your whole building, and just make sure that there's a vent in there.
Yeah.
If you've got servers and other things that are producing more heat, then you need to be talking about dedicated systems that are specifically for that equipment to keep it running. You notice, I don't know if you can see in the picture or not, but we have a dedicated system. You can imagine the data center back there generates a lot of heat. It's engineered to where we know exactly where the hot air is being put out on the rear side of the equipment, and cold air is being pulled in from the beginning or from the front to make sure that all those electronics. So again, it depends on the scope and the size of your environment, but cooling's important. You need to be able to keep the temperature down, ideally in the 70s for the equipment. Today's equipment is become more tolerant towards heat than it used to be, but still, it's all about longevity of your equipment and protecting it.
And I guess that can sort of play into the power discussion too, because if your power is out for an extended period of time and you do have a lot of IT equipment that is still running, the cooling is not going to be taking place, and so then you're putting your equipment at risk because it's going to just be heating up the room. And if heat's the enemy, that's not a good situation.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, and so you've got to think through all those things. So batteries will keep you going for probably 20, 30 minutes. During that time, you probably don't have your HVAC running on battery because
Right.
That'd be a heck of a battery. So yeah, you got to make sure that you don't go past that heat threshold during that time. If you're going to run it for extended periods of time, you have a generator in place. Not only does it need to be sufficient to power your equipment, it also needs to keep your cooling going.
Yeah. Yep. So before we go any further, and we do have several more points of physical environment to talk about, I'm just curious, how do you engage when you're working with customers and you're consulting with them on designing their physical environment to meet their IT needs? What happens when you tell them something like that, like based on what you've told me, you're going to need a generator to keep your IT systems running in case of a power outage? Where do they go from there? Is it how do you work with them to actually execute on plans?
So we have partners that we'll work with and referrals that we can get you to people. We don't sell generators, obviously, but we have people that will help come alongside them, help them design that properly.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the benefits of, InfoSystems is going to be celebrating our 25th anniversary next year. And when you've been in business that long in a city like Chattanooga and Knoxville and Nashville and the places where we do business, you've had time to build those types of relationships. And so we have very reliable partners and other trusted companies that we can bring in to help out with these issues. So moving on from cooling, the next thing, and you already alluded to this in one of the segments, physical security, and you alluded to that when you mentioned being able to lock a door to protect your IT equipment. Talk a little bit more about physical security.
Yeah, so certainly if you've got any data being stored on your premises at all, a server, for example, then physical security is an absolute must, because even though I've got my firewall, I've got my protection to keep somebody from breaking in through the internet or something like that, physical security is necessary just to keep somebody from walking in the door and picking up the server and walking out the door with it.
Sure.
Because at that point, they have unlimited time to be able to try to break through encryption and things like that. So it becomes super important. But I wouldn't say it's just only if you have servers. Just protecting your equipment, just the pure value of it is something, because you imagine a room like that, there's a high concentration of expensive equipment in there that has high resale value. So physical security is important, just from theft in general. Forget the data that's on it. But even if you just have network equipment like routers and switches and firewalls and things like that, physical security is important, because having physical access to a device gives me an enhanced ability to be able to break into that device. For example, a lot of network equipment has something called a console port that's on it, that there's the access to that level of the OS isn't available any other way except through that console port, where I actually literally plug in a serial cable into that. And it's very frequent that the security on that console port is either non-existent or substandard to what it would be elsewhere.
Yeah.
So just securing it with a lock on the door. Another reason, just to keep someone from walking in and plugging into your network. Yes, someone could walk in, to a conference room, plug into a jack, and be plugged into your network and be able to sniff and look for things on there. It might be harder for them to get away with if they're in a conference room, because someone will see them. If they're in a closet somewhere plugged into your system, someone may not know they're even there. So another reason to keep the doors locked and make sure that someone can't plug into your network.
And while you're mentioning physical security and keeping doors locked, as you mentioned, someone might be able to sniff at your network, just not even accessing your actual physical server equipment and network equipment. So at InfoSystems, our physical security extends to our external doors. People can't just walk in our building for any reason. We have physical locks on the external doors that require, employees have a card that they flash in front of the sensor that unlocks the door. So guests or people who don't have those cards can't get in unless an employee inside the building physically lets them in the front door. So, some companies may want to look at extending physical security beyond just the server room or the IT closet or whatever that is. Because, there may be other ways to compromise their network. Other things we brought up, and we'll kind of move through these a little more quickly because the episodes, we don't want to record a 40 or 50 minute episode here. The people probably won't listen that long, but you mentioned things like grounding for data cabling.
Sure. So, we've all seen the data cabling plants. You've got low voltage cabling that's run throughout your whole building, Ethernet that there are people plugged into. You need to make sure that cabling is grounded as well. It carries it's considered to be low voltage cabling.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it won't carry higher voltage cabling should you have a nearby lightning strike or surge or something like that. So low voltage cabling needs to be grounded as well. It often is not.
Yeah. And then something major that I would assume if you don't have a dedicated space like a locked closet or a locked room or a larger data center space for your equipment, cleanliness could probably be a major issue because we know that there are business environments, especially when it comes to manufacturing and warehousing and things like that, where they're not the most dust-free type of environment. So quickly explain how cleanliness can impact IT equipment.
We talked about heat being the enemy of electronics. Dirt is as well. And you think about a lot of electronics has those little fans in the back drawing air in to the equipment. And so, it's important that you have a clean environment just to protect the life of the equipment. I think what goes with clean too is also neat. And sometimes we think, well, the equipment doesn't care about it being neat or not. And you're right, it probably doesn't. As humans do, and the reason it's important to us is if something is neat, if your cabling system is nice and laid out and labeled and easy to trace, it makes troubleshooting a whole lot easier. So that if you have a problem, if someone comes in and if they find a rat's nest in your server room, that's going to sometimes exponentially increase the amount of time it takes to troubleshoot because they're just having to sort through physical mess. So cleanliness and neatness count.
And we all know when you increase the time it takes to troubleshoot issues, you're talking money. Because you're paying more for the additional time of troubleshooting, but you also could be potentially impacted from downtime that's costing your business during the troubleshooting. And the last note I had on physical environment was form factors of devices, laptops, pads, phones, etc. Talk a little bit about form factors.
Just encourage people as they're making decisions about the equipment they're buying is consider the form factors, the ergonomics of the situation. Sometimes computers are bought just off of their specifications, processor, RAM, that type of thing, but they come in a variety of form factors, and that can matter to just, if you get a full-size tower and you have a little tiny cubicle and not space to put it there, that can greatly, impact someone's ability to have a comfortable office environment. So just encourage people to think through those things, is making good decisions about what will fit, about comfort level, about keyboards that are going to protect people from carpal tunnel syndrome. Just all those things come into play.
I know I've had an issue with that in the past, carpal tunnel, and switched to a stand-up desk so that I could reposition my hands and better posture and things like that, and it made all the difference in the world for me. So again, that was physical environment and making sure it leads to comfort and productivity and things like that. So one point I thought I would make after we've brought up all of these, and there's more, this is not the extent
we're
of
just scratching the surface.
Yeah, the physical environment when it comes to IT, and we could have several episodes about this topic, obviously, but because there are so many considerations, that's one of the driving forces behind the movement to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you reduce the complexity of your on-premise
Absolutely.
IT environment, you're essentially outsourcing all of those things to another company. So if a company was doing business with InfoSystems as their cloud provider, we're the ones who are having to think through power, cooling, physical security, surge protection, cabling, cleanliness. We're taking care of all of those things as a service, along with providing the IT infrastructure that's delivered through a cloud relationship or an outsourced relationship. So, when I think a lot of times when companies are considering cloud and talking about the way they've done IT for however many number of years, they're probably only thinking about direct cost of equipment. And they're not thinking about things like that. A company that may have grown tremendously in size over the course of 5 years or 10 years may have exponentially more cost involved with maintaining their IT environment on premise, because they're having to do things like dedicated power circuits and dedicated cooling systems and just the physical square footage, the floor space that they have to dedicate to IT equipment, where there's probably an inflection point where it makes sense for them to say, maybe it's best for us to not be as deep in the IT business anymore, maintaining our systems, maintaining our physical environment to suit those systems. Let's potentially look at outsourcing. So I just thought I would throw that in there, because I believe that a lot of times people just look at cloud as an apples to apples alternative to doing it on premise. Like, okay, we could just buy all this equipment ourselves. We don't have to pay a cloud contract month to month. Some people prefer one or the other, but there are other considerations, like we've talked about today, that make it a different discussion other than just which is the better IT infrastructure delivery mechanism for my people.
Right. Essentially, it comes down, like a lot of this, to business decision.
Yeah.
It's sitting down and working out the math on it and figuring out what's the best route for your business.
Yep. Well, that's great. I think this is a good place to wrap up the discussion. Maybe we'll have to bring up physical environment again in a future episode to hit on some more points. But to me, this episode was great because it's one of those really practical things that companies need to be thinking about as they continue in business. Is my physical environment right for my IT needs? Should we make some changes? So if you aren't sure that your physical environment is right for IT, or if you suspect that things could be addressed, then I would encourage you to reach out. And Aaron Swann, our VCIO, could easily come visit and discuss these topics and help your company solve some of the outstanding issues that should be addressed.
Yeah, I would just encourage you to and take the matter seriously. We've had real life examples of walking into customers and saying, you really shouldn't have your water heater in the same room as your data equipment, and unfortunately we're proved right on that just a couple months later.
Yeah.
So physical environment matters.
Not only is heat the enemy of electronics, but water is too.
Yes.
All right. Well, great episode today, Aaron. Thanks again, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you for listening.